Hey, what up, guys? Welcome back to Think Shank. We are coming in right at the conclusion of the Western Conference Finals, and oh my goodness, jam-packed with storylines and characters and character arcs, tight finishes, incredible finishes, gut-wrenching finishes. As a overall basketball fan, you just have to be thankful. I think that this is the kind of series that maybe we don't realize it, but something crystallized for a few different people and even teams that didn't even compete. GMs, head of financial and operational decisions, just a ton of implications coming out of tonight. Number one, positives, better offense from Jaden. We saw him step up his outside shooting throughout the postseason and really shoot that shot with confidence. I think really coming up big, particularly in the Denver series as really an X factor. Then we have Rudy, who too little too late just showcased a little bit more potential and prowess as the roll man, both with footwork and finishing, doing Euro steps and dump passes to Karl-Anthony Towns out of double teams onto Anthony Edwards and pick and roll. Kyle Anderson, it was really cool getting to see him get back on the court. Also too little too late. Such a smart, witty, offensive and defensive player, coming up with steals on Luka Doncic. Of course, directing traffic and telling Ant to hit corner three looks for Cat and things like that. I just love how quickly he gets off the ball. And then, of course, you have Cat towards the end of this series waking up. Also too little too late. The last two games finally seem to come around to it. I'm sure he realizes this, but if he wasn't struggling as much earlier in the series, I think it goes without saying this whole complexion of the series could have shifted dramatically given how much of a razor's edge each one of those early three games were decided. Baked into that is the Finch roster recognition, more Kyle Anderson, less Mike Conley. In Finch's last postgame mentioning something like, I'm going to have regrets about how we started off this series. I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of that has to do with Kyle Anderson, and I think not running Ant into the ground. Hey, these are things we overlook because it's not just the players that grow in their experience and knowledge and understanding of the playoffs and the roster. Finch is also grown from this playoff run. Negatives. Number one is it wasn't just the offensive execution that came up short. I think the schematics did as well. So I just gave flowers to Finch for figuring things out eventually. I don't think it's just about rotations, though. I think schematically there could have been different attacks on offense that would have, one, potentially resulted in a more potent offensive system, but two, it would have avoided running Anthony Edwards into the ground. You heard Stan Van Gundy on the broadcast, not just in this last game, but earlier too.
Look at how hard Minnesota's buckets look like compared to Dallas's.
Where Dallas is running the same spread pick and roll, pick you apart, figure it out. What are you going to do? Double it, fine. Oh, next time around, you're not doubling it anymore. Credit to Dallas's defense, but again, with these sort of bread and butter resting heart rate, offensive plays, and schema, you have to have some of that ready to go that isn't just Anthony Edwards ISOs. How hard it looked for Minnesota to score it all, I think is really just why so many people were like, yeah, this is why I wanted Denver instead. Is this better matchup, whatever. Just want to clarify really quick. I think what you mean there is they've optimized their schematics and their brands of basketball, as well as they have accumulated enough reps, experience, trust in each other to execute at a high level. The emphasis there being on the schematic identities. Everyone knows how Denver likes to play. Everyone knows how Dallas likes to play. Yes, it would be really cool to see them play, but I just want to make sure we understand that. Minnesota had so much opportunity to enhance its own offensive potency from a schematic level, not just an execution level, in my opinion, and I'll explain why. Lacking experience and maturity at that stage. The experience side, we have the attention to detail piece. Rudy mentioned this in the post game that Dallas was ready and waiting to pounce on Minnesota's mistakes. Of course they are. That's what contending level teams do. Finch in his post game mentioned execution required to come out on top as you play better and better teams. The requirement is just higher. There's a higher activation energy to execute, fewer and fewer mistakes. You have to capitalize when you can. So that is just the reality of the playoffs. Next is the competitive stamina. The fact that Luka seemed to be heckling with hecklers every single game, and I started to realize that I think he was doing it on purpose to fire himself up. And for the whole MJ son persona that Anthony Edwards contrives is kind of lacking in that department. There is a lot of self-initiated fire and motivation and stuff. But I keep remembering game 4 when Hardy got around Ant and made a layup, said something to his face before trotting back down the court. And Ant just like hears it and then nods and then passes it to like Kyle or somebody to give it right back to him on the inbounds after the made layup, and then just like runs up the floor and just makes a mid-range. It's almost like you want the other team to start talking shit because clearly that helps Ant. The same thing is true for Luka, right? And he kind of just manufactures it on his own with these fans, which I just think is interesting. So yeah, when I think about the competitive stamina, especially when your back's against the wall from a series record perspective, but also in a game when you're under an avalanche like this past one, I just think that that was an interesting tactic, if you will. So cool. On the maturity side, you have frustration fouls, goes without saying. Karl-Anthony Towns, I just have no words at this point. But a little less expectedly, you had Jaden McDaniels getting in foul trouble quite a bit. Luka is an absolute nightmare and horror to defend. And like I said, there are just a million different reasons why Luka gets under your skin, from the constant whining and the flailing around and the insanely tough shot making despite how good your defense is, bro. It literally doesn't matter. He's just a very frustrating guy to defend. But then you also had the scuffles with Rudy. I think Rudy's gotten double T's in two of the games. I can't even remember. But Rudy needs to stop getting involved in dust-ups with D. Jones, and it's just very strange to me, and I just really don't think Rudy's like that. The turnovers, Ant had a terrible inbounds play. Some of the misreads, even earlier in the playoff run where Ant's chucking it over guys' heads and hands. He's always trying to force a skip pass, which is another thing that I think he needs to work on. But you also had the bench vanishing. It was like an upside-down pyramid where I felt like the bench started the playoffs a lot more potent and then steadily produced less and less and less. Obviously, that can be a result of the pressure and first time being in that moment, and especially coming off of the bench. It's kind of tough for your bench guys. I think it's just kind of that simple a little bit. The home game record, the Timberwolves lost 5 of their last 6 home games of this entire playoff run. I expected in this postseason that to actually be a huge plus for them, considering the historic drought that the city is in. It ended up being the opposite. I think they were just scared of disappointing their fans, and I think there was a lot of that pressure where, especially on Karl-Anthony Towns' shoulders, where he has rode through the highs and the lows of everything. And he even said in his postgame, the fans deserve a lot. I just personally feel like he put a lot of pressure on himself to deliver for that city, given all of the struggles that he has tried to help them overcome and caused himself. So great. Overall takeaways. I think it's part of the natural evolution. It actually reminds me a lot of Oklahoma City and Luka the first time he dragged the Mavs to the Western Conference Finals. The Wolves should be very proud of what they've accomplished this season. In the playoffs, overcoming, let's be real, mortal enemy number 1 in Denver, an incredible show of passion, heart, all of those things, especially for the franchise that they are playing for. Also because of the regular season that they had. So having the number 1 seed most of the year, holding on to that top defense ranking all year as well. But more importantly, they had so many guys win awards for the regular season this year that the sacrifices that were made for the overall team to have more success, I think is such an underrated part of this to point out here. Credit to Karl-Anthony Towns for flagging this. You had the 6th man of the year, you had the defensive player of the year, you had the teammate of the year, 2nd team All-NBA, huge step forward for Anthony Edwards. They had a lot of guys clearly have a lot of success this season that made sacrifices, whether it be minutes-wise, particularly with Naz Reid, where they made sacrifices for the betterment of the overall team. And I think everybody should be proud of that. Last but not least, giving not only the Minnesota fans, but the overall league fans, just an awesome, inspiring news story to support, root for. This is just an awesome team with a lot of promise and a lot of juice, and it was awesome to see them compete and fight, even if it ultimately led to this outcome, which, if we're being honest with ourselves looking backwards now, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise. Conditioning. So Ant said in his postgame that they trained for 82 games and honestly didn't even expect to make it to the Western Conference Finals. Not super sure how to take that. I guess stoked and excited, but goddamn. I guess one of those things where definitely should never, ever hear you say that again. That leads into the last takeaway I have, which is even with ideal, optimal conditioning, I truly, truly think that as currently constructed, assuming they bring everyone back, they either need a skill upgrade, whether that be an external trade of sort, or a relatively hefty schematic shift in their offense. Again, with the conditioning piece, I truly have a hard time believing that in today's NBA, with all of the pace and space and all of the incredibly talented guys, particularly Anthony Edwards, if he's guarding Luka freaking Doncic and carrying that much offensive load, impossible to expect a heavy diet of isolation ball and leading the fast break will kill you eventually. Like, to me, there's a reason why Jokic, Halliburton, Brunson all wore out in this postseason. They all broke down. I truly, truly believe it had to do with the level of load that they were carrying on both ends of the floor. And Anthony Edwards, granted, 22 years old, physical specimen, awesome, still has a limit to what he can physically produce for you when your schematics aren't effective or potent enough and you're asking that much of him on defense. You can't have half-ass schematics and then have it devolve into isolation possessions for Ant Edwards while he's guarding the second best player in the NBA. I was just the least surprised that he was absolutely fried by the end of this series. And you know what the funniest part is? Who is actually doing pretty fine, even though he started the postseason with a bum knee? Luka Doncic. You want to know why? Let's talk about the offensive schematic ideas I have. All right. There is a reason why Harden, who gets clowned on for being out of shape, and Luka, who has never been the most athletic, love pick and rolls. It requires trust, skill, and chemistry from overall team, but primarily Ant, Rudy, and Finch. Let's start with Finch / the team. The spacing for everybody else around a pick and roll is absolutely paramount because when the initiator hits the roll man, or even if the initiator keeps it, both of the guys have to be confident in knowing where the spacing is going to be. For example, if Ant were to hit Rudy with a slip pass and he gets a free run to the basket and then the low man steps up for that help defense, is the weak side corner, is he just going to sit there in the corner like Jaden McDaniels or PJ Washington, or is he going to come up and slash like Aaron Gordon? I would highly recommend the Aaron Gordon route, considering how enormous your power forward and small forwards are. So the team just needs to be able to recognize when to crash or when those plays might happen, where they should be spaced, etc. For Rudy, you need to have a short mid-game. If you are going to be an effective role player, you can't just expect to get Euro steps and get dunks. Look at Hardenstein. Hardenstein has perfected this really wacky looking float shot that's really, really effective, considering he's 7 feet tall, just like Rudy is, and nobody's going to be able to block it. You have to present another kind of threat there, again, to get the help defense to actually come up. So in addition to having that threat nearish to the rim, that passing to the lob or the corner, like your Draymond or Jokic, have to be intact. Are you going to be a Draymond and kick it out to the weak side corner for an open three when the low man comes up? Or are you going to be a Jokic who just makes the short lob pass to Aaron Gordon? I think both are viable. We all know what's the most efficient and why Denver picked what it has. Here's why, if you're an Anthony Edwards fan, you should be glad that he and this iteration of the Wolves lost to this iteration of Dallas. For Ant specifically to be maximized, he has to learn to toggle between Kyrie and Luka when it comes to operating that pick and roll. What do I mean by that? To operate more like Kai is to lean into your physical gifts and advantages. Obviously, if guys go under the screen, you have to be able to rise and fire. If they go over the screen, that 1-2 dribble into the mid-range, quick pull-up, very much proven his effectiveness inside of that mid-range, especially playing with Rudy Gobert, has helped him in that sense, which I feel like a lot of times really mastering in the mid-range is something obviously not many guys can do at an efficient rate. Also, the level of difficulty, generally speaking, is higher. So I think that shows a lot of promise. Or you do the classic Luka thing with, okay, guy goes over the screen. I'm going to just get into the teeth of the defense, wait for the low man to come up, lob, or the kick, or the skip pass, or I'm just going to hit a floater or banker. Side note, have we ever seen Anthony Edwards hit a floater? I don't know if we have. I mean, maybe, but the Kyrie side is leveraging that quickness. Kyrie is all about quickness, whether with the dribble, the hesitation, the lateral movement. You need to be able to have the screen get set and make that decision very, very quickly, get into the teeth of the defense very quickly as well, and then make the split-second decision very quickly. Luka, what he has mastered is using his very, very big frame at 6'8", like 230. He doesn't need to be fast or athletic because he just gets guys on his hips. You can't really do anything from behind him without fouling, and so once you finally get back in front of him, he lets you plant that first foot in front of him, which means you can't really jump out to contest, and then he just fades away and hits the shot every single time. If you watch his tempo, that's how it works. Get the pick and roll, get you behind me, slow, 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 and then he'll let you get back in front, and then again, as soon as you plant that foot, fades backwards, hits it, or lets you get back in front and manipulates, again, the low man anyway and still gets the lob. Freezes the entire floor because he is waiting to see if that low man's going to commit to him and to see how fast the guy behind him, his actual defender, is going to get back in front of him. But he freezes the floor, again, because of his big physical size and his ability to just get the whistle when he wants if someone behind him is messing with him. And so for Ant, yes, he doesn't have the same frame as Luka, but he has such a strong gravity and threat of exploding at the rim, as well as his mid-range pull-up shot, that I still think there is manipulative opportunity to be captured. I've never said that before. Particularly that low man is where I get very curious, is I don't think you can even give Anthony Edwards more than 3 steps inside of the arc before he literally could detonate and put you in the basket that fast. So I just say that to say a great source of that manipulation, kind of like Ja Morant. The big thing there, though, in my opinion, is you need to have a short mid-range game. Classic point guard thing where you have the Jalen Brunson flip shots and the spin arounds and the short giant killers, whatever you want to call it. Have not seen Anthony Edwards really do that ever. And again, I just think that is basically a requirement in today's NBA to be able to score from that short mid-range position, because you're making sure that the low man has to honor your scoring threat at that distance to then open up the lob and the kickouts and all those things. All right, so toggling between both of those sides, what is the big punchline there? Requirement number 0 is getting that pull-up three-point shot to go, just having that muscle memory in place to just be able to basically pull up wherever you are. After that is reading the actual coverages, not just the cross court and seeing how guys are positioned to cut off the skip pass, but at the point of attack. Are the bigs coming up and hedging? Are they playing at the level of the screen? What kind of angle of screen should Rudy be setting? This is just low-hanging fruit. Obviously, you have to be really good at reading defenses to be good at this. Great. Last but not least is the foul drawing piece. Still more than a handful of times where I felt like Ant is relying on just overpowering guys with his sheer athleticism and praying to get a whistle. I think you can conserve energy by slowing yourself down, using the slow step that he's proven to be very, very effective with to ensure that you are drawing contact, especially in air quote desperate situations. This is where you see the age and youth, just like Karl-Anthony Towns, will just drive down the lane like a rhinoceros and again, rely on that overpowering athleticism to hopefully draw contact for a whistle. There is a reason why guys like Luka Doncic and Jalen Brunson and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander are very effective near the rim at drawing calls, and it doesn't require athleticism. And again, when you just present that much pressure to the rim, that's all you need. Overall miscellaneous things. Why even propose these new offensive schemes? Well, I just want to clarify quickly. First and foremost is avoiding Ant burnout. Even with your peak level conditioning, shooting, obviously we've seen you are going to get worn out, because if you are going to stop a top-heavy, guard-driven and guard-led contending team, and Edwards is going to have to lock in defensively, and we saw that. And then we also saw what that leads to eventually throughout the course of the series. And this time, granted, it was in round 3, maybe earlier in the run it would have been different, but the point is the same. You are risking burning out Anthony Edwards by not employing more styles of attack on offense that don't involve basically everything devolving into isolation and him having to create everything, as well as Cat. And all of a sudden, he's turning the ball over. He's so gassed, he's getting beat on defense. I also think it's important to avoid the Luka trap or Trey trap, where both of those guys have just been such focal points of the offense, and they are the offense basically, and ultimately it ends up rendering them useless off the ball. And I think this is a separate conversation. Maybe the last frontier for Luka Doncic, especially with a high-powered Kyrie now, is he just doesn't present really any off-ball juice or value. I just can't stop thinking about the fact that Anthony Edwards is like if you took DeAndre Jordan and you just fit it into the body and frame of a John Collins packed into like a 6'4" frame or 6'3" frame. Oh my God, it's nuts. And I'm just like, dude, if you just got him slashing to the rim, it's over. Again, within like 10 feet, I mean, it's over. Kind of similar to Kuminga on Golden State. Like if you just started employing that kind of stuff, obviously that requires ball movement and more Kyle Anderson, which honestly is probably a good thing. And then last but not least is way too much untapped offensive skill. Naz Reid, Karl-Anthony Towns, Jaden McDaniels even, way too much shooting talent and mobility at size and length that is just fundamentally not being leveraged well enough. And then with Rudy, we found this out way too late. Turns out he might actually have some potential as a roll man. I don't know how as a coach you didn't even try and think that way earlier in the series, but it seems like Rudy can actually somewhat play make out a pick and roll. And hey, it hurts to look at, but oh my God, it gets the pressure off of Ant and lets someone else make a play. All right, so number 1 is Ant off ball, not only for just the Ja Morant insane physical tools and being able to yam on everybody. He has really improved his outside shooting, and I just think that's just gonna get better and better, which is obvious. But most importantly is as he gets better and better at shooting from the outside, that just means the closeouts are gonna be even harder. And even right now, he's one of the best attackers of closeouts in the league, and it's just so smooth to even look at right now. What's lagging, obviously, is the actual reading and registering. Naz Reid actually kick it out to Ant Edwards. That is an automatic rotation generating play because Ant Edwards attacking a closeout is nightmare fuel. Next is Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid out of the post. Admittedly, I'm not really sure if either of those guys even like playing that way. I think it's most probable they don't. But back to my original thing of if you play with that much size and length and mobility, if you have Karl-Anthony Towns playing in the post, presenting that Jokic level pressure at the rim, everybody's focused on him, and all of a sudden you have a Jaden McDaniels flying out of the weak side, especially in that small ball lineup where Rudy sits, and then you have Naz Reid or Karl-Anthony Towns, whoever is going to play center in those backup minutes, do the Aaron Gordon like he did in the last series where he just ascended as a mini Jokic. I truly think that should be something they should consider doing, particularly against opponents' bench lineups with that much size and skill, presenting that much pressure at the rim. All of a sudden, you have Jaden McDaniels coming out of the weak side corner for an Aaron Gordon lob, or Anthony Edwards. We all know Rudy has absolutely zero ability there. I just think that could be a different look that could be really interesting with all that size. In this series against Dallas, we got some flashes of how well Karl-Anthony Towns can pass near the basket. And the big-to-big passing, I mean, it's virtually unstoppable. That just seems like something that could be worked on. But then in addition is working from the outside instead of the post. Are we even a little bit confident enough in Naz and Cat's ability to operate a pick and roll themselves? We all know how much Karl-Anthony Towns loves a runway. Man, that dude wants to fucking destroy the rim. He wants to just bruise and bludgeon anybody in his way. And if you, again, in an actual pick and roll setting, instead of all of this isolation initiation things where he's trying to turn the corner and not turn the ball over and not trip over himself. If you actually just got him a little bit of a screen and got him half of a step, I mean, that guy, 2.5 steps inside of the 3-point arc with a little bit of runway. So if you do an inverted pick and roll, let's say with Cat and Ant, for example, we all know Cat's not afraid to shoot from the outside. If they go over, now you've got Karl-Anthony Towns having a wet dream, which is a half step on his defender and a runway to the basket to break some legs. Whether it's his or someone else's, it's unclear. If you got, and I know this is insane, but again, it's all about reading and responding to the defense. If you had Anthony Edwards with Luka Doncic on him, and gives it up to Cat has PJ on him, and you do an inverted pick and roll, and then let's say you have Luka, who doesn't move his feet fast at all, and then PJ trying to fight over that screen, who obviously, again, is bigger than Ant. You have to be really smart, obviously, with your positioning and everything, but if Ant can even get him a slip pass, and then you've got Anthony Edwards rolling to the basket, and then you've got a really tall guy who can maybe pull from 3 or even do a 1-dribble pull-up from the mid-range that nobody's going to be able to block. These are just skilled bigs that I'd just be curious. I'm just asking the questions. Last but not least is just the normal pick and rolls. If they did run a pick and roll, Rudy Gobert set every single screen, which, granted, he's probably just their best screen setter from a skill perspective, and he's just a bigger body and frame, fine. But again, you have really, really big, really, really skilled big men. Why didn't we do any Karl-Anthony Towns or Naz Reid screens for Ant? They can mix it up. They can both roll. I think Cat much more so than Naz, but Cat gets more minutes. Just do an actual screen, have Cat roll, again with the runway thing. He loves that. He can also pick and pop, and on top of that, they're both good at passing. I mean, Naz Reid is basically a 6'9" guard. We all know that. They even say it on the broadcast, which means, again, that facilitation as a roll man for that extra passing is already there. I'm sure the obvious answer is you want them on the perimeter to be the recipients of those extra passes to then knock down the shots. But I don't know, man. I'm just trying to float ideas here. And again, this could be a skill issue. This obviously is a trust issue, a chemistry issue. But I really think that these ideas should at least be entertained because there's just way more creativity and untapped skill on this lineup. Okay, Minnesota has a long way to go in terms of fully solidifying its offensive identity. It's incredible they made it this far, and it's a testament that they did to that defensive identity. But you know what is the ceiling raiser? Now it's time. Now it's time to get that offensive identity going. I think Ant said that or somebody else has said that before. There's an overflowing amount of offensive skill on this roster. It's just a function of operationalizing it effectively and then building reps, building chemistry, building trust. You just keep going and going and going. That's why the Dallases and the Denvers are the poster children of where you ultimately want to go, where you have a clearly defined identity on both ends of the ball. All right, guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.